The wind moved strangely that morning, like it carried a sorrow too old for the trees to hold. Miriam had been chopping kindling when the howling started. Not the kind that echoed from coyotes in the canyon, but something closer, more broken. It came in waves, rising and falling, as if mourning something the world had already forgotten. At first she tried to ignore it. The last snow was still crusted on the ground, and chores didn't wait for mysteries. But the sound gnawed at her, low and aching. After the third time it came, she dropped the axe and followed it into the trees, boots crunching over frozen earth. She wasn't one to chase shadows, not since the war had taken her brother and half her belief in happy endings. But this sounded like a heartbreaking in real time. She moved deeper through the pines, where the branches wove tight enough to block most light. The howling grew louder, and soon it wasn't just sound. It was grief. She stepped over a fallen log and nearly slipped before spotting movement ahead. A small clearing opened like a breath between the trees, and there, on his knees beside a shallow pit, was a boy no older than 10. His long hair was tied with a strip of rawhide, his frame too thin for winter. Beside him lay a still shape, matted fur, streaked with blood. A dog. A pup, really. Miriam froze. The boy didn't notice her at first. His hands worked the cold earth with a stick sharpened into a spade, tears silent now but still streaming. It wasn't the kind of crying children do for attention. It was the kind that came from deep beneath the ribs, loss carried in silence. She stepped closer, slowly. The boy's eyes flicked up, startled but not afraid. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, just kept digging. Miriam knelt a few feet away. "He yours?" she asked gently. The boy nodded once. "He saved me," he whispered. "From a trap." She looked at the wound. It wasn't clean. The dog had bled out slowly. "I can help bury him," she offered. He didn't answer, just moved to make room. Together they worked, hands scraping frozen ground, breath fogging the winter air. No more howling, just the quiet work of goodbye. Miriam didn't ask the boy's name. Some grief didn't need introductions. By the time they laid the pup down in the grave, she already knew this moment would change them both. The grave was shallow, but the earth was too hard to go deeper. Miriam watched as the boy placed the pup into it with both hands, cradling the limp body as if it might still stir. He whispered something in a language she didn't know, a string of soft syllables, then covered the pup with a folded piece of deerskin before beginning to push the soil back over the tiny form. Miriam handed him stones to mark the spot. He arranged them carefully, his small fingers trembling not from cold, but reverence. When it was done, he sat back on his heels and stared at it without blinking. Miriam waited in silence, arms wrapped around her coat. She wanted to ask questions. Who was he? Where were his people? Was he hurt? But the weight in the air told her this wasn't the time. Finally, he spoke. "He came to me in the storm. No one else did." His voice was flat, but the pain behind it was raw. "They said I was cursed because my brother died. But he came anyway." Miriam nodded slowly. "Dogs don't care what others say." The boy didn't smile, but his eyes met hers briefly. There was something wild in them, grief and pride and loneliness all tangled together. "He stayed even when I stopped talking," he said. "Even when I ran from the camp. He followed." "Is that where you're from? A Lakota camp?" He didn't answer. She saw his shoulders stiffen. "You don't have to tell me," she added quickly. "But it's getting colder, and you can't sleep in the woods forever." He hesitated, fingers brushing dirt off his knees. "I'm not going back," he said. "They didn't come for me." Miriam's throat tightened. She remembered that feeling, being left behind, being forgotten when you needed someone most. "Well," she said, standing and brushing snow off her skirt. "Then you're coming with me. You've done enough digging for one day." He blinked up at her, stunned. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," she replied. "But I know that dog would want you warm tonight." He looked back at the grave, then at her. A long pause, then a slow nod. She offered her hand. For a moment he stared at it, then took it with fingers like ice. Together they walked back through the trees toward her cabin. The howl was gone now, but something else echoed softly behind them. A bond not broken, just beginning. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke and stew. Miriam stirred the pot with one hand while keeping an eye on the boy, who sat stiff-backed in the corner, still wrapped in the coat she had draped over his shoulders. He hadn't spoken much since they returned, but his eyes were always moving, watching the windows, scanning the shelves, studying her face as if trying to decide if this was safety or just another kind of danger. She didn't press. She knew too well what silence could mean for a child with no home, and too much memory. "Supper's ready," she said gently, placing 2 bowls on the table. He hesitated, then crossed the room slowly and sat. She noticed how carefully he handled the spoon, as if it were unfamiliar. "What's your name?" she asked. A beat passed. Then, softly, "Tayan." She smiled. "That's a strong name. I'm Miriam." He nodded once. They ate in silence, the fire popping softly in the hearth. After a few minutes, he set his spoon down and looked at her. "Why are you alone?" The question caught her. No one had asked it in years. "Because I needed quiet," she said. "And the world wasn't kind for a while." He seemed to understand. "Me too." She reached for the bread, tore off a piece, and offered it across the table. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, and for a moment she felt the weight he carried, the invisible burden of someone far too young to know so much loss. "The dog," he said suddenly. "His name was Kangzi." Miriam nodded. "He was a good one. I saw it in the way he stayed close, even when he was hurting." Tayan's lips twitched, almost a smile. "He was my brother's. After..." He paused. "After the fever took him, Kangzi stopped barking, just followed me everywhere, even when they didn't want me." Her heart cracked at that. "Then Kangzi was right. You're not someone to be left behind." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The firelight danced across his face, softening the sharp lines of hunger and grief. When he finished eating, he whispered something in Lakota over the empty bowl. A prayer, maybe. She didn't ask. That night she made up the cot with warm quilts and tucked him in without a word. He didn't resist. As she turned down the lamp, she heard him murmur, barely audible, "Mitakuye oyasin." Miriam stood still. All are related. She whispered the words back, not knowing exactly why, but knowing, in her bones, that they were now part of each other's story. Morning came slow, with gray light spilling through the frost-bitten window panes. Miriam rose early, feeding the stove until the iron groaned with heat. She let Tayan sleep, watching his chest rise and fall in the quiet rhythm of children who hadn't known peace in too long. Outside, the land lay blanketed in snow, trees bare as bones. She stepped onto the porch with her coffee, eyes scanning the horizon. But something felt off. The air carried more than cold. It carried smoke, not from her chimney, and not the pine-sweet smoke she burned, but bitter, sharp, and distant. She set her mug down and stepped further out. It was faint, but her instincts were sharp from too many years alone. Someone else was out there. She returned inside and quietly roused Tayan. He blinked awake, alert immediately. "What is it?" "Smoke," she said. To the north. His expression changed. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. They might be tracking me. Miriam stilled. Your people? He shook his head. Not anymore. If they wanted to take me back, they would have done it before. If they're here now, it's to make sure I don't return. She couldn't fathom that kind of cruelty, but she'd seen enough in the world to know it was possible. Then we stay close today, she said. And ready. They moved with quiet efficiency. Miriam gathered her rifle, checked the door, made sure the back window could open if they needed to slip out. Tyan helped without question, his small hands knowing too much. He had been hunted before. By mid-morning, the smoke had thinned, drifting southward, but the unease stayed. Miriam made soup and watched the tree line. Tyan carved something from wood by the fire. A tiny dog, rough but full of care. She didn't ask if it was Kangi. She knew. After lunch, Tyan looked up. You don't have to keep me. I'm not keeping you, she replied. I'm choosing you. He blinked, startled. That's different. It is. He held the carved pup to his chest, eyes darting to the window. Then I'll choose to stay. If the smoke moves closer, I'll leave before it hurts you. You won't be leaving, she said firmly. We'll face it together. That night the wind howled again. Not from a dog, but from something colder, something watching. But inside, by the fire, a boy and a woman shared bread, a name whispered over soup, and the unspoken vow of two souls who had already lost too much to let each other go. The world outside could burn. In here, they had a flicker of something stronger. A start. The next morning brought silence so thick, it felt like snow had fallen not just on the land, but in time itself. No birds called, no branches creaked. Miriam stepped outside wrapped in her coat, rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes cutting across the white crust of the field. That's when she saw them. Tracks, not animal. Human. Barefoot. Headed straight toward her cabin from the northern tree line. Her breath hitched. She crouched, studying the prints. The steps were light, deliberate, weaving slightly, like someone wounded or cautious. She followed them just far enough to see where they ended. Not 20 paces from her porch, the snow was disturbed where someone had knelt. And beside that, tucked into the crook of a rock, was a bundle of dried sage. Miriam's stomach turned. This wasn't just a stranger. This was someone with purpose. She returned to the cabin, bolted the door, and set the sage down on the table. Tyan watched her, pale. What does it mean? She shook her head slowly. Depends who left it. Could be a blessing, could be a warning. He swallowed. I think they're testing you, or me. Then they're wasting time, she said, fierce now. No one tests children in this house. That afternoon, she taught him how to load the rifle. Not because she expected him to use it, but because knowledge was safety. He listened carefully, movements clean and calm. When they stepped out to chop firewood, he kept glancing at the trees. They're close, he muttered. I can feel it. Miriam didn't doubt him. Some part of her had known since the smoke first rose. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did Tyan. They sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, waiting. Around midnight, they heard it, a soft knock. Once, twice, 3 times. She raised the rifle, motioning for Tyan to stay back. Who's there? She called. Silence. Then, from beyond the door, the dog repaid the debt. Now the child walks free. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a verdict, a final one. She opened the door slowly and found no one. Only a feather, black-tipped and glistening with frost, laid across the threshold. She bent, picked it up, and closed the door behind her. Tyon stared. "They've released me." She nodded. "Seems so." He exhaled, and with it, something heavy left his shoulders. "Then this is really home now." Miriam smiled for the first time in days. "It was the day you walked in." And outside, in the dark, a presence faded into the woods, satisfied that the boy had found where he was meant to be. By morning, the storm had softened into a steady whisper, blanketing the hills in white silence. Tyon sat on the porch steps with a wooden spoon in one hand and a carving knife in the other. He worked quietly, shaping the handle with short, careful strokes, the way Miriam had shown him. She was inside kneading bread, her sleeves dusted in flour, the cabin alive with the scent of warmth. Something unspoken passed between them these past days, a rhythm, a comfort, a trust neither dared label out loud. It was the kind of peace that never asked for permission, only time. Tyon looked up at the trees and said, "They're still watching, I think. But it's different now. They're not waiting to take me back." Miriam didn't answer right away. She pressed her palms into the dough with purpose, her mind sifting through memories like dry cornmeal. "Sometimes," she said finally, "people leave because they don't know how to stay. Doesn't mean you weren't worth staying for." Tyon nodded slowly. "I don't hate them anymore, but I don't miss them either." He held up the half-carved spoon. "I want to make one for the pup's grave." Miriam smiled at that. "Then we'll bury it proper come spring." A crow landed nearby, hopping through the snow. Tyon tossed it a crust of stale bread. The bird tilted its head, studying him, then flew off with the gift. "He's a messenger," the boy said. "He'll tell them I'm safe." That afternoon, they hauled in more firewood, Tyon dragging the smaller logs while Miriam split the larger ones. The snow glistened under the low sun, and for the first time, the land didn't feel like it was holding its breath. That night, they didn't bolt the door. It creaked gently in the wind, like a lullaby in an old tongue. Tyon slept curled beneath Miriam's patched quilt, the feather still resting on the shelf above him. She sat beside the dying fire, eyes catching the flicker of shadows, listening. Not for threats, but for the sound of belonging. She didn't know where the road ahead would twist, what seasons would test them, or whether the boy's past might come clawing back one day. But she knew this. Tonight, no one cried. No one ran. No one was forgotten. In a world built on losses and longings, that was enough. And outside, the snow listened to the breathing inside the cabin, learning the rhythm of a new family born not of blood, but of choice. When the thaw finally came, it came slowly, as if the land was waking from an old wound. Patches of brown grass peeked through the snow like scars, and the trees shook off their white coats branch by branch. Miriam walked with Tyon past the line of pine where the Apache dog had first limped into her life. They carried a spade, a bundle wrapped in cloth, and the carved wooden spoon. Tyon was quiet, his breath visible in the chill morning air, but his steps were steady. He led the way to the spot by the creek where they'd buried the pup months ago beneath a cairn of stones. "He didn't have a name," Tyon said as they knelt, "but I think he knew mine." Miriam said nothing, only handed him the cloth-wrapped spoon and stepped back as he knelt and cleared the frost from the stones. He placed the spoon gently at the base of the cairn. "You carried me before I could walk alone," he whispered, "so I carved you something to carry back." A wind rustled the branches above them. It wasn't cold. It was reverent. Miriam watched him from a few paces away, her eyes burning from more than just the wind. When Tyon stood, he looked older, like a boy who'd left something behind and wouldn't go looking for it again. "Come spring," she said, "we'll plant wildflowers here." He nodded. And every year after. They walked back in silence, but it was a full silence, not a hollow one. The kind that spoke of healing, not absence. That night, as Miriam poured water into the basin and Tyon dried the dishes, he asked, "Do you think he really was my brother's soul?" She considered the question. Maybe. Or maybe he was just a dog who saw something worth saving. Tyon smiled faintly. Same thing, maybe? As the sun dipped below the ridge, painting the horizon with fire, Miriam pulled the old journal from the shelf and handed it to him. "Start writing," she said. "Our story deserves to be remembered." He blinked. "But I don't know how." "Then you'll learn, just like I did, with firewood, bread, and scars." Tyon opened the cover slowly, the blank page staring back like fresh snow. He dipped the quill in ink, hesitated, then wrote the first words. "He came from the woods, bleeding. I didn't know yet that he would save us both." Miriam read over his shoulder and said nothing. She didn't need to. The story had begun again. 2 weeks later, the pines had shifted from gray to green, and the cabin door now welcomed morning light, filled with promise. Tyon emerged before dawn, carrying his journal and the spoon he had carved, its handle turned smooth and warm from use. He paused on the porch, watching a circle of crows alight in an aspen. 3 birds, perfectly still, before hopping down to peck at their reflections in melted puddles. To him, it felt like an audience. He opened his journal and began to write. Miriam stepped out, a jug of fresh spring water in hand, and paused to watch. "They're the same ones," she said quietly. He looked up. "They came back when Kangi did." She nodded. "Messenger birds, family watchers." He closed the journal. "I think they're telling me it's time." "Time for what?" she asked gently. He handed her the spoon. "To take him home, to meet others who understand." Miriam placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can choose to stay too, if this is home." Tyon looked toward the trees, then back. "I'll come back." He turned toward the forest, stepping off the porch with a deep breath. Miriam watched him go, the crows lifting in unison behind him. She felt peace. He was no longer running. He was walking toward something true. And when the birds vanished, they left the air quiet, expectant, and full of the next chapter. Days later, Miriam cleaned the porch when the scout appeared. An older Lakota man, tall, quiet, with hands marked by sage smoke. He carried no weapon, only a bundle tied with leather thongs. Tyon followed him, curiosity etched on his face. The scout knelt beside the wooden spoon and unrolled the bundle to reveal a length of braided sinew topped with cedar and sweetgrass. He spoke in Lakota. Tyon replied. Miriam watched as the boy and man turned toward her, then swept a pinch of sage through the air, the scent sharp and clear. Then the elder pressed his palm to the spoon's handle, to Tyon's forehead, and to the earth before the cabin. His voice was soft, but firm. "Witness." They stood together, witness to legacy, grief, and the new bond they shared. When the ritual ended, the scout gave Miriam a carved feather pendant. "For seeing," he said. And with that, he faded back toward the trees, his presence a bridge between past and promise. Spring had fully arrived. Wildflowers bloomed at the creek's edge, the grass whispered beneath the breeze, and the cabin brimmed with new sounds: laughter, the clink of spoons, the soft scraping of quill on paper. Miriam prepared a meal outside: smoked fish, wild onions, bread, and berries. Tyon laid the braided sinew on their table, woven between bowls. and above it he placed the carved spoon and feather pendant. Guests lingered at the tree line, without invitation, but accepted. Neighbors curious but respectful, birds perched on branches, and the spirit of every buried memory. Tyan stood and spoke. "We gather today not for loss, but for gratitude. For the dog who saved me, for the land that held us, and for each other." He passed around rations of food and slices of bread. Miriam joined him, eyes bright with pride and hope. The Lakota elder stayed at the edge, his gaze steady and approving. As the meal continued, children laughed, elders nodded, and the crows watched from above. When dusk fell, Tyan lit a small fire and performed a final prayer, not in words, but in tears and smiles and the rhythmic pat of the spoon against a bowl. He looked at Miriam, then at the horizon. "Home is where you are lived. We carry it within us." And as the fire burned low, the cabin, the land, and the stories woven beneath the cottonwoods glowed warm with belonging. Their journey, his and theirs, was just beginning.